Burying your feelings is easy. Putting on a tough face and a happy face is easy. Actually dealing with the things that you haven't dealt with, that's tough. Okay, welcome back to the Talk Midland podcast. My name is Logan Richetti with Modern Realty. Today I have a special guest with me, Michael Verona from Inspire Counseling and Wellness.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to talk about counseling, mental health counseling. There's a lot of things interesting about what you do and what you're doing, and I'd love to share that with the group today. So first and foremost, let's start out with a technical question about counseling.
Okay.
Because a lot of people listening right now may be interested in mental health counseling, but maybe a little bit timid to reach out and start the process because of a lot of reasons: stigma, time, cost, uncertainty of what it actually looks like or feels like or actually does for you. So let's just start out with a technical question. How do you define mental health counseling as it pertains to the average Joe today that's just looking to feel better?
That's a great question. Mental health counseling is really just somebody making a decision that whatever is going on in their life, they can't get there alone, right? They're not feeling right. They're feeling a little bit off, and they don't feel like they can do it alone. So they reach out to somebody who is willing to sit with them for as much as they need. They're an objective voice. They're an objective ear that's going to listen and work through some of those issues with them.
You and I are both process-driven people. Describe the process of counseling from start, beginning, middle, and end. Is it a linear process?
Not always. It's a matter of reaching out to a firm, to a practice like Inspire Counseling and Wellness, scheduling an appointment. A lot of times we will congratulate a client or affirm the fact that they even got to counseling, because it is a big step for a lot of people. The biggest step is making a warm, welcoming environment for any client that walks through the door. So that's the first step. The second is having them, when they get into that room, understanding that whatever they bring, they're going to be treated as a human being. They're going to be treated with respect, with love. They deserve to be treated that way. And whatever they bring into the room is what we'll start with. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it looks different for every client.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. We were talking about the COVID coronavirus pandemic, and staying at home and being with your spouse all day and being with your kids a lot more time and not having the normal routine that people were used to. That created a lot of mental health troubles for a lot of people.
Yes, it did. It interestingly, during the pandemic, counseling spiked. In a way, it was positive because it removed some of the stigma associated with mental health. But we saw a lot of individuals that called in and had to come into counseling or wanted to come into counseling. It was generally through telehealth, and it was because they weren't used to spending 24 hours a day with their spouse. They weren't used to spending 24 hours a day with their kids. Kids felt the same way. They weren't used to being in a house 24 hours a day with their entire family. I think we didn't realize the break in the day that work gave us, going to work, that process, that routine of getting in your car, maybe going to get a cup of coffee, going to the office. I think people began to appreciate that a little bit more during COVID.
So when somebody comes in for counseling and it's their first session, how do you start?
Personally, I'll introduce myself. We'll talk a little bit. I'll know a little bit about them before they come in. I don't like to know a lot because I want to be completely objective. So they'll walk in and sit down, and basically it's, what brings you in today? And then we take it from there. We have the counselors that work for Inspire. They may have a different process on the first day. They're, one of the good things about working for our practice and working as a counselor is that autonomy to hold a session, to run a session the way that you think is appropriate.
Kind of do it your own way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not necessarily like a real estate transaction where you have a clearly defined life cycle. You have milestones and checkpoints where you're moving your client through the process. It's more of a tailored individual approach to each client's needs based on their individual situation.
Yes, you'll have in the first or second session, we'll create a treatment plan.
Oh.
And that treatment plan will be based on the presenting issues that they bring to session. And after that, how we approach that treatment plan is really up to the counselor and the way the client is progressing. But really, You could have a treatment plan. You could have a big plan for their second or third or fourth session, and they walk in and something happened during the week, and you're handling that. So there's definitely some guidance, but we really are trained to work with what the client brings into the room that day.
Why is there such a stigma behind mental health counseling? Why are so many people reluctant to give you a call and kind of come in for a session?
That's a good question. That's a very layered question. There's a lot to that. From a stigma standpoint, I think as we've moved away from the medical model where mental health was something that was wrong with somebody that could be treated by, quote, a doctor in a medical setting, that's where I think some of the stigma really grew from. Also, stigma with addiction, for example, using words like junkie or alcoholic or crack addict or a crackhead or things like that, that perpetuates the stigma involved with addiction. So I do think that COVID helped reduce some of the stigma surrounding just mental health in general, and that we're working on that. But I really think that stigma has a lot to do with the way that the general public perpetuates it. We're getting better. We have a long way to go. It's very important in my practice, and I think in the counseling profession in general, is that we approach it from a holistically, we approach it from a wellness model, and that is all of us have things going on in our lives that can kind of throw us off or interrupt our mental health, and seeing a counselor can go a long way to kind of getting us back on the right track. But it's always person first. I'll never refer to somebody as a drug addict or an alcoholic. It's always an individual addicted to alcohol, an individual suffering from addiction, an individual with a bipolar diagnosis. Too many times we call individuals by their condition. We'll call them bipolars. Even people refer to it themselves. They'll say, oh my gosh, I'm so bipolar. So we work hard to do person-first language.
So we have couples counseling, addiction counseling, trauma, abuse, just regular mental health struggles, depression. There are all kinds of reasons that you would seek counseling. Do counselors have specialties? Are they generalists? Are there both? How do you pick a counselor if you need some help?
All the above. We have seen all of the above. And one of the ways that we've approached Inspire Counseling and Wellness is to get different types of counselors. So a whole family can be seen at our practice and have any number of issues afflicting them. We have a couples counselor. We have a child and play therapist. We have individuals that focus on self-esteem of young girls. We have individuals that focus on trauma. We have individuals that are generalists. We have individuals that focus on addiction, like myself and another one of our therapists. So our practice is, we intentionally put the practice together so that we have counselors that have specialties. Now, that being said, I think it's important that the whole practice, the entire practice, can look at a lot of different mental health issues through a trauma lens, and that's what we're working towards that right now.
So what you mean by that is most, if not all, mental health concerns or issues at some degree or another stem from some sort of trauma.
Yes, the spectrum of trauma has widened. Trauma doesn't have to be going to war anymore. Trauma can be growing up in a household where your parents fought regularly, and you heard a lot of yelling. You heard some, maladaptive ways to work to work out relationship issues. So that can be an aspect of trauma. That's just an example. But trauma, the lens and the spectrum with which we can refer to something as trauma has widened. And by looking at it through that lens, we can really start to pinpoint the source of somebody's behaviors.
Safe to say that deep inside of a counseling life cycle journey with a client, at some point you're turning the car left down to the past of their childhood.
Yes, and if we're not turning down the road, we're looking down the road and saying, "Hey, I see something." We might go up to the house and open a few doors. Doesn't mean we have to stay there very long. Doesn't mean we have to visit for long, but generally we're talking about something.
So there are going to be questions like, "Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your mother. How did you feel growing up as a 10-year-old?" and things like that.
That question might come up, or another question might be, tell me about your first childhood memory. And well, that's a question from a very specific theoretical approach. That to me gives me a picture of who was in that memory. Which people in that memory were negative? Maybe none. Which people in that memory were positive? Maybe none. But a lot of times that will give you an idea of how that person pictures themselves in the world.
I would imagine as a counselor, your client is not going to be overly open with some of their deepest, darkest secrets and memories. So part of your questions are leading questions to try to help them to open up a little bit in terms of being honest with themselves, being honest with you, because in order for you to help somebody, they have to be honest with themselves. But it's not easy to be honest with somebody you don't know, you don't necessarily trust yet, or maybe you trust, but it's still just hard to be open.
Yeah.
I think trauma and childhood abuse and things of that nature must be incredibly difficult for people to acknowledge, let alone share with somebody, and actually deal with those feelings and bring those things back to the surface when they've been burying those things for years. When you see a client that actually does the work and actually opens up and deals with the past trauma, what is oftentimes the result?
Well, you said it at the beginning of your question, which was you alluded to self-awareness. And to me, that is one of the most important things that will dictate progress in a therapeutic relationship is the bringing things into awareness, helping the client bring things into awareness that they were not really aware of. It was in there somewhere. But getting them to say it out loud or realize it, it brings a realness to it, right? It brings some truth to something that maybe they only kind of thought was going on. I think about trauma, for example, as, and there's so many different metaphors, but one way is just be carrying just a backpack full of just rocks and weight and memories, right? And it's not real rocks, obviously, but it's the memories of those rocks can stay with you and slow you down. So what I see when clients are able to bring those memories up, and we talk about leaving that memory here, right? So you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Me as the therapist, I'm carrying part of it with you. So leave it here. Let me work with it for a little bit. And when they walk out, hopefully they walk out figuratively a little bit lighter. And if we can work on even the little tiny stones, the little tiny pebbles that were traumatic in their lives, each time they come into session, if we can just lighten their load just a little bit over the course of weeks and months, they start to see how they can handle life in a way free of the weight of the trauma that happened in their childhood or even in their adulthood. But I think that was your question, right? Which is what I see them is walking out a little bit lighter, walking a little bit higher. And when they come into session, the looks on their face, their posture, everything, they're less burdened.
Let's talk about couples counseling a little bit.
Okay.
I have experienced a little couples counseling. I have struggled with it. I haven't had the best outcomes from my experiences in couples counseling. I've also tried some individual counseling, and I don't know if I'm just a bad client or what. I'm a very type A, very to the point, very direct communicator. I want to get right to the answer. And I've noticed that in almost every interaction with a counselor I've faced, they want to go through a process to get to the answer, and I often find myself jumping towards the end. How do you slow somebody like me down and help guide somebody like me who really wants to get to it and really wants to address the core issue? How do you slow somebody like that down and kind of lead them at a different pace?
Wow, I'm not a couples counselor. Just let me put that out right there. But even from an individual standpoint, I would really, be curious as to why the answer is so important to you in that moment. Like what is coming up for you physically in your body, in your mind, when you need to get to that answer. That is the self-awareness I was talking about. So maybe that's the first thing we work on is what need is being met by you getting to that answer in an hour or a minute, versus being able to sit with that and wait for a couple weeks.
Would you suggest a couple have their own individual counselors and then work together with one or both of them or somebody else? How do you structure let's just say a happy relationship that just wants to nurture itself and grow itself or has some troubles or whatever, and they just want to be stronger and closer and make it work. What's the best structure for a husband and a wife or a boyfriend and a girlfriend, whatever, to set up counseling? Should they do it together? Should they do it separately, or what?
There's a lot of different questions in that one. If it really is a couple who feels that they're solid, but maybe they have some communication issues, maybe they just want to talk some stuff out. Probably straight couples counseling would be helpful. For most individuals or most couples, I would suggest that they see counselors individually and then see a couples counselor who is not associated.
Why is that?
You can't avoid but bringing yourself into a relationship. So if there are things going on that you can't get past as a couple, chances are you have some of your own stuff you have to work through as well. I think it's a great sign, or it's a great act of love to say to your partner, I think I need to talk to somebody, or I want to talk to somebody. Why don't we both talk to people individually, and then we'll also go see this counselor together.
Do those counselors confer with each other, or do they leave their things separate, or how does that work?
Generally, leave things separate unless we're given permission by the couples to talk.
Is it better to have your own individual counselor and then a third counselor that mediates in between, or is it better to have one counselor that sees you each individually and then sees you together?
I would not recommend the last one you just mentioned, which is seeing the same counselor separately and then seeing them as a couple. That would be putting a lot on that counselor. We're human beings, and it would be really hard to not be unbiased when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Having an individual counselor that has an objective ear for you, is in your corner, is out there, is there for trying to help you become the best version of you. Okay, I think that's important. And then seeing a couples counselor, and then if your partner wants to see a counselor in the same way, and then having a couples counselor that is also there to produce the best version of this relationship that they can. The less overlap, the better.
Okay. What about counseling for children? Grief, trauma, abuse, loss, but also just behavioral counseling. There's a lot of that going on. I have a 5-year-old. I inherited a 5-year-old, so they're going through all the developmental stages. What is the benefit to somebody at that age having a counselor?
That's a great question. And once again, I'm not a child therapist or even a play therapist. It depends on what is going on at home. At a very, very basic level, the benefit to the child is having a positive adult relationship. Okay? They don't have to talk about the 5-year-old or a 9-year-old doesn't have to talk about all the issues going on in their life. They don't have to get 1,000 questions like they will at, maybe from a parent or even a teacher at school. A lot of times it's just about sitting in a room with an adult who they feel safe with, who doesn't judge them, who doesn't pepper them with questions. And during the course of that play therapy, they might be building a puzzle, they might be drawing a picture, they might be coloring. But during that, the counselor is trained to be able to read when and what should be discussed during that. A lot of times it's nothing. A lot of times it takes a little bit of time. And finally, a client might say, well, I really got mad at my older brother this week. And that might just come out after a few sessions. But it's only after the child feels safe and believes that adult is there for them.
When you're raising a child and you see behaviors, or you're comparing them with other children, who can sleep through the night on their own versus who gets up every night, and who can concentrate on their worksheets longer than the other ones, and things like that. Part of not knowing as a parent what is normal behavioral, variance, and what maybe is a behavior or an action that maybe would benefit from some mental health counseling or help. How, as a parent, do you make that determination?
That is really tough. Because different parents will make it at different times. You can have kids that where behaviors are very disruptive in a household, and they decide not to go to take their to make an appointment. And you can have some parents that see this tiny behavior that they think is alarming, and as a result, they call in. So it really is going to be up to the parent as a, and I'm not a child therapist. I would definitely want to defer to a child therapist, but I also would judge, as a parent, I might judge my intuition or my gut and just say something's a little off, and really counseling is accessible these days. There are waiting lists, but it's accessible. Make an appointment with a therapist and get an intake and see what goes on. A lot of times you might get, you know what, there's not really anything going on. I think everything is just fine. And sometimes that's the best information you can get.
Yeah, we took the baby to the doctor yesterday and they told us she doesn't have an ear infection.
Yes.
Sometimes you just need to go check.
Yeah, right. And how'd you feel after that?
Felt much more relieved.
Right. You felt better. It was just one of those little pebbles out of your backpack, right? Just felt a little bit lighter. Yeah, and sometimes I think really just establishing a positive adult relationship that is not the parents is a lot of times the biggest benefit for the child. There are child therapists out there that are going to hear this. They're going to be like, Mike, no, I understand. I'm saying what I know in this moment. So.
All right, 2 more demographic questions.
Okay.
Young mothers.
Okay.
I think young mothers have an incredible burden of lack of sleep, primary caregivers in many cases, primarily responsible for the young children, always worried about their safety, their health, their well-being, their comfort, while putting their own physical, mental, and emotional well-being last. Also trying to, be good partners and run the household and oftentimes working.
Yes.
That just seems like too much.
Yeah, it's a lot. Everything you just said, all of that is expected of a young mother.
That's right. It's expected of a young mother.
It's expected.
I think more young mothers need their own counseling. Okay. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I just think that they would benefit from having an outlet to release how they feel.
100%.
Why don't they do that more?
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question. It really would be helpful just to vent, a weekly vent, right? But then they might ask the question, who's going to watch the kid as I'm getting that counseling? So, if society could lower the expectation that they have of young mothers, that would be helpful. But going in to see a counselor and just have somebody that is not there to judge you in any way, we all have bad days. And, based on the expectations on young mothers, they may feel like they're having more bad days than others. And I think there's a lot of people out there that can understand. That might be a good support group to start right there.
Well, that leads to my last one, which is working dads.
Uh-huh.
Working dads have no outlet whatsoever.
Right.
Outlet for stress, for venting, as you call it, or just blowing off steam. That doesn't exist, and that's a tragedy. I don't know why. I'm 40 years old now. I have 3 kids now, which is cool, and I'm just seeing this from a different perspective than I ever have. I have all kinds of friends that are overworked, overburdened, stressed, exhausted. Carrying the burden, which is a happy burden, but the burden of providing mainly for their family, being a good role model, being a good partner, trying to maintain their health, watching their physical health suffer, their mental and emotional health suffer as a result of just prioritizing the things that are important, right? Making a living, being a dad, being the leader of the family, all those things. There's nothing for us. Why? How can you put together a program for dads that makes it easier to say, yeah, I'll do that. I'm not afraid of that.
I think you're onto something. One, I can identify with everything you just said as a father myself and a working father. The other thing is, we're talking about stigma. The stigmatization of mental health in men is not something that's necessarily been accepted or been reduced as much as some of the other mental health issues. So there's definitely a stigmatization of men and mental health. Hopefully having somebody like me come into the counseling field where I see most of my clients, if not all of my clients, are males. So I appreciate when they bring stuff into session and they're like, well, I'm not supposed to feel this way, but this is the way I feel. And so I appreciate when after a few sessions, they're able to open up and I can hear these things. But it was interesting. I saw a few clients, men, who were going through divorces. And those individuals were looking for support groups for men going through divorce. There were not any in the area. There were support groups for others, but not for men. So I think you're onto something. That maybe we should be a little bit, us in the counseling profession should be a little bit more proactive about creating groups that support men.
You absolutely should.
Yeah.
The entire industry is failing men, I believe. And I don't say that as an insult. I say that as just an observation. I doubt I would go to a men's group. I don't know that I would do that. Maybe I would. I don't have addictions that require group, therapy.
Yeah.
I know a lot of men do, and I have some friends that do that.
Yeah.
Alcoholics, drugs, and sex, I guess.
Yeah.
There's groups for that, and some of my pals have confided in me that they go to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the old days, I would have maybe judged them. I would have said, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
These days, I actually, in my mind, and I hope other people listening feel the same way, I don't know, but I admire the courage that
absolutely.
they do that. Now, you go talk to the Navy SEALs, they're going to laugh at you, say that
Yeah.
you're just a wimp or whatever. And that's cool. I understand the idea of being tough and strong and not opening up. But what I've learned as I've matured as a man is that opening up and actually dealing with your thoughts and feelings is harder than burying them. Burying your feelings is easy. Putting on a tough face and a happy face is easy. Actually dealing with the things that you haven't dealt with, that's tough. And so I would love to see counseling programs like yours build and market and normalize somehow a product, or I call it a product, but some kind of offer where men and women, young moms, young dads, older moms, older whoever, can actually come in and just get a tune-up. Get a tune-up. It's like your car. Your car doesn't have to be broken for you to go get an oil change. Right. Can you just give us a tune-up?
The male oil change, or the mental health oil change.
What do you think of that? Is that just crazy?
My mind's rolling now. I'm trying to think out how we can market that.
Well, I think what happens is, mental health. The idea of mental health is to help people with addiction, to help people with abuse, trauma, divorce,
problems.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the rest of the world who's functioning by and large pretty well? They're raising a family. They're doing their jobs. They're in the community, but they have trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to blindside you in this at all.
No.
Everything you do is wonderful.
And I'm hearing everything you're saying. You're talking about it's easier to push feelings down. It's easier to suppress them than it is just to get up and talk to them. Just put them down and barrel through, right?
Yeah.
Head first. What the research shows and what we see is the problem with that is it will come up somehow. And it usually comes up through addiction, anger.
100%.
Yeah. Some people are lucky enough to direct it into like doing yard work or exercising or training for a marathon, which is another type of addiction, in my opinion.
100%.
So the problem with pushing it down and not talking about it is that most of the time we reach critical mass as men. We reach critical mass and we boil over eventually, and it comes out in some way that we never saw it coming. And by that point, it's a little bit too late. So the goal is to kind of, I call it like a stress bucket. We keep making deposits into that stress bucket, and that when it finally overflows, it wasn't the thing that overflowed it. It was everything before that. So what I think is counseling pokes a hole in that bucket, and it allows you to regulate that and get through some of those issues before it overflows, before it reaches critical mass and becomes a really big disruptive problem in your life.
I love it. I agree with everything you said. And I really do. I think men especially, they bury everything, and then it builds and builds and builds. They don't think about it. And then it manifests itself through an addiction, through a behavior, through all kinds of things that are never good. Right? Either they just get buried in video games and they neglect their spouse, or they start drinking or doing drugs, or they find interest in another woman or whatever. There's all these things that you do instead of dealing with the things that are holding you down, and like you said, adding weight to your bucket. Yeah. And that's just a shame.
Yeah. And, that's one of the reasons I'm excited to be here talking about our practice. And as you mentioned, we started with one office, just me in Mount Pleasant, and grew that to 5 counselors and 5 offices. And now we're opening our 3rd location here in Midland on Ashman, right up the road.
Keep going.
Okay.
Build more.
Yeah.
You should build 10 offices. Okay. You should have 100 counselors.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to schedule a counseling session.
It is. There's waiting lists all over the place. And what's interesting is as we're adding more counselors, we're really one of the few that I know in town, in Midland, that is actively seeking clients, that we have openings. As I mentioned, just up the road, on 2707 Ashman. We're opening up our third location on March 1st, and it's going to be. We're not changing the name just yet, but it's going to be the Inspire Family Counseling Center. We're going to focus on couples, on families, on children, on teens, because we're seeing when we opened the first location over on Wackerly, we noticed that our couples counselor and our child therapist filled up immediately.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and the other ones filled up as well, but those two demographics, so to speak, have less availability than our other ones.
What are the economics around mental health counseling? How does it work? Not necessarily specifically, but generally speaking, do you have to have insurance involved? What are the benefits and the downsides of having insurance involved? You take insurance. How does it work?
You don't have to have insurance. It would be called self-pay. And generally, if individuals are interested in self-pay, it can get expensive. So we'll work with them on a plan that is accessible,
Affordable, yeah.
accessible and affordable for them. Most insurances, we work with all of the major insurances. Most insurances do cover mental health, and generally, it's a large percentage of the session is covered, and then the client will pay a copay.
Is it true that in order to have your insurance company cover your mental health, you have to be diagnosed with a mental health issue?
For us to get, I would say that's going to be part of the process. So by the second session, we will have somewhat of an idea of what you're experiencing, and we will include a diagnosis. And when we bill the insurance companies, that's part of the requirement is to have a diagnosis in there.
I certainly understand the process, the economic process of that. My question to you, because that's a little bit of a challenge for me to overcome, was when I did this recently, I didn't want to have anything assigned to me or to my partner that was a mental health stigma, illness, whatever you call it. Because there are child custody concerns, there are other, there's job concerns, stability concerns, there's gun rights concerns, and maybe some of that's a little bit kooky, but some of it might be, is it justified, or is it a reasonable concern to have, or is it just no big deal?
I wouldn't say it's no big deal. I think it's reasonable from a mental health standpoint. If you're concerned about it, it's reasonable. Let's talk about that. From a factual standpoint, anything that happens in the counseling room is confidential.
Okay.
Unless the exceptions of confidentiality are is if you indicate that you're going to harm yourself or somebody else, or if you disclose that there's a vulnerable population that is being harmed. And that's generally referring to elderly adults or young children. Okay. Or if I'm subpoenaed in a court of law. Besides that, the diagnosis and all the notes associated with your session are confidential, and we will fight. We have an ethical obligation to fight if somebody asks for that information. So
to maintain the confidentiality.
Yeah. If somebody doesn't subpoena us, we're not going to just be telling a store or somebody that so and so has a certain diagnosis.
So in other words, my employer wouldn't know that I was doing counseling.
That would be
unless it was coming through their insurance provider.
No, they're not going to know that either. That would be a HIPAA violation.
Oh,
you would be protected through HIPAA.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
that makes counseling more accessible to people that might share my concern.
Yeah. Now, if something happened that was criminal in nature,
oh, that's different.
Yeah, then there might be a subpoena for those notes, but your information is protected through HIPAA.
So really no big deal to have a diagnosis of a mental health concern. It's not anything you need to worry about. In other words, hey, if you're trying to get counseling, let them diagnose you accordingly and then go work on yourself. You
can have input on your diagnosis as well. You can know what's being said, what's being talked about, what's being done. So I would say I think clients don't always realize this. They can take an active role, and they can see their notes. They can see what's written about them. And that's one of the reasons, the direction I keep with notes, for example, is when I'm writing about a client, I write a note as if it's plastered up on a wall in a court of law and my client is right there. I don't want them to be embarrassed. I don't want any additional information to come out that might compromise them in any way. So that's something that we try to do in our practice is Counselors write notes the way that they feel comfortable with, but we're always talking about writing the minimum amount of detail in a note.
All right, so I'm coming in tomorrow for my first session.
Okay.
I'm working with you. What are we talking about?
It depends on what you bring in.
Well, Michael, I'm just, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm very, I'm stressed out with work and with maintaining the family and trying to keep my health and my well-being. I'm coming in here because I just got a lot on my mind, and I need to vent a little bit.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate. Tell me a little bit more about your responsibilities.
Well, I obviously have a business. I got a modern Realty. I have several businesses, to be honest with you. I'm blending a family.
Okay.
I'm dealing with the back end of a divorce, and
Gosh.
I'm struggling physically to maintain, my optimum health. I don't sleep very well. We have a baby that's, an infant, and I have a 5-year-old that doesn't sleep through the night, so I have to co-sleep with her sometimes. I'm struggling with that.
Okay.
Boy, I got a lot of stuff going on.
You have a lot going on. What I would say is if, out of all those 10 things that you just listed, what's the first one you want to talk about? Let's just talk about what you think the one that's the most pressing.
Interesting. Okay. So then from there, I would just kind of think about what's on the top of my mind today.
Yeah, because a lot of what happens is, exactly. It's on the top of your mind. And as you talk about it, to me, it literally uncovers other stuff.
Yeah.
So as we, if we talk about the blended marriage, which can be very, very stressful, we talk about that for a session. And I'll say, hey, go home, think about some of the stuff we talked about. And you may come back and it may be completely off your plate. Mm-hmm. But like, you know what, that was really helpful. But what it made me think about was this. And then we start talking about that. And all of a sudden we're peeling these layers back, and then you start talking about things that you didn't even realize were issues.
And then so what is the result of that conversation? Is it advice from you? Is it self-awareness from me? Is it just releasing emotional energy, or all the above?
Less advice.
Yeah.
Advice would be the least thing that I would want to provide. I think there's not necessarily a stigma, but there's this thought that you go to your counselor for advice. Uh-huh. The way that as counselors, the way I was trained is we approach it from a collaboration. You are the expert on your life. You know what's going on. I am just a bystander, right? We're going to talk about what you want to talk about. And then through that, we're going to work through that discovery of what you're talking about. We're going to work through the best possible solution for you. You're the expert on your life. I can't give you advice on what to do. We can talk about it together and figure it out together. It's a collaboration.
What's your focus for this year?
So 2024, we focused in 2023 was a lot of growth. Opened a new office over on the corner of Wackerly and Jefferson. 2024, we were going to slow down. Turns out we found a great space on 2707 Ashman. So we're expanding. So 2024 is about solidifying what we already have. Okay, it's about getting the Inspire Family Counseling Center going, and it's about getting support groups going. And this is going to be we're thinking about definitely support groups for individuals and families suffering through the disease of addiction. Mm-hmm. This can either be for individuals actually in recovery, or a lot of times the families are who suffer the most. Mm-hmm. So having a group, a weekly group for individuals and families, spouses, partners, siblings, whoever it might be that are affected by an individual who's currently in active addiction, support for LGBTQ groups, and other groups that are not necessarily represented as highly here in Midland.
All right, so if anybody wants to be part of a individual counseling session, a couples counseling session, or a group session with Inspire, where do they go to get signed up?
So we're still working on the groups, but individual counseling, they would go to our website, which is www.inspiremidmichigan.com, one word, and take a look at our website and see who interests you. We have biographies of all of our counselors on there. They can read about myself and about a dozen other counselors. And then call the main number, 989-444-3209. And the person who is in charge of scheduling, we talk to everybody in person. A lot of times these days with technology, you fill out a form, you get an email confirming you filled out that form, and then they say they'll have somebody call you. Sometimes nobody calls you. They just set you up through email with somebody. We don't do that. Every single one of our clients or potential clients talks to our person in scheduling. She does an intake with them and gets an idea of that person's personality, their needs, and then we match you specifically with the counselor we think is best for you.
Midland has a serious shortage of mental health counselors available, and you're trying to grow. So if you speak to the mental health therapists that are coming up through the programs now, or looking for a place to work or a new place to work, why should they work with Inspire, and how do they get in touch with you?
Great question. Yes, we are hiring. We're expanding. We at least have 4 offices that we're looking to fill with a child therapist, maybe another couples therapist, and an individual therapist. Those would be the 3 types of individuals that we're looking for. We're recruiting right now. I know that Central Michigan University is going to have a graduating class here in May. So anybody graduating in May, I would encourage you to reach out to us on inspiremidmichigan.com.
A counselor can go basically work anywhere. Why should they work with Inspire?
So Inspire Counseling and Wellness is a counselor-centered practice. Everything that we do, all of the processes we put in place, the tools that we provide our counselors are there to make their job easier. Our goal is that when a counselor walks in the door every day, all they have to worry about is seeing their clients and providing the best therapy possible. We do all the credentialing, we do all the billing, we do all the scheduling, and we have wonderful, warm, and welcoming offices.
Michael, thanks for being on the Talk Midland podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.